wanted to give you all a reminder that the writing contest is due on the last day of May, so hurry up and get those turned in. Obviously, it's the first week of May, so you don't really need to worry about that too much. But make sure to get those in before the last day of May. I'm really looking forward to all your entries. Today's lesson is going to be traditional publishing submission tips. Now, this is very similar to my 10 things to do to avoid rejection video. However, I'm doing different tips from that video, so just consider this kind of a part 2. These are all things that were not in the previous video, or if they were in the previous video, I'm going more in depth on them than the previous video. So first of all, why is it important to format your manuscript according to how they ask before you submit it? And the reason why is because it is comparable to an ACT or SAT test score when you're going to college. If you don't have a certain test score, you can't get into certain colleges, right? That's because they just automatically throw your application in the garbage. It's the same thing with formatting. If you don't format it properly, they're immediately going to assume, just like ACT scores, oh, you have a low enough ACT score, you won't get into this college. Same thing with publishing. Oh, they don't know how to format, don't even bother reading that. And it's really sad. I think that's not fair because there are some fantastic books out there that people just don't know really how to format that well. I've worked with people that struggle with formatting and as a professional editor and helped them and been like, your book is amazing. Your formatting's just really off and really confusing. And that's okay. That's part of the editing process. That's something that you need to work on, and that's okay. Another reason why it's important is because of the fact that it's less work for them. And that means that if it's less work for them, they're more inclined to say yes. Editors and publishing companies, funnily enough, I learned this the hard way when I became an intern at a professional publishing company. They want to do the least amount of work possible. They don't want to take the book that has the most promise but has a ton of character flaws and a ton of telling versus showing issues and a ton of info dumping. They don't want to have to deal with that. They don't care if the world and the characters are the coolest in the universe. If it has too many issues, it's too much work, and they aren't going to accept it. They're going to accept the one that is more polished. So formatting is just part of making sure it looks more polished when you submit it. Speaking of formatting, you want to make sure that it is in Times New Roman font. And that is all of it. Yes, I love it when people do cool chapter titles and cool fonts, but that's something that the formatting people on the other end, once you're accepted, will handle later. For now, Times New Roman and 12-point font. Don't do 14, don't do 10, don't do 11, 12-point font. People can tell the difference. As an editor who's been doing this for a very long time, I actually can, by sight, tell about what font size things are, and I know when it's not 12. So I imagine that editors and professional publishers are very much the same way. You also want to make sure it's double spaced. If it is single spaced, that is going to make them weirded out. If you have any spaces between paragraphs, that's going to weird them out. Make sure that you have your classic tabs, so on and so forth. Proper dialogue formatting, all those kinds of things are going to help you be able to get published better. One thing that is very interesting about formatting is that italics are generally used for emphasis, not bold anymore. Bold has gone out of fashion. Sometimes bold is still okay to be used, and sometimes people will let you get away with it, but italics is for emphasis. They don't really use bold anymore. I don't know why that is. If I'm being honest, I think it's just fine, but is the way it is. The next thing that I want to talk about is if you have spaces or jumps. So for example, 3 months later. If you're not starting it at the beginning of a chapter and it's like in the middle of a chapter, make sure that you give 3 spaces, and in the middle of those 3 spaces have 3 asterisk marks centered. That is how it is preferred for formatting as well. Next thing on the list is query letters. With traditional publishing, they're very picky about query letters too. In your first paragraph, you need to have your genre, your word count, and whether or not you plan to have it be part of a series. And the way it is phrased is, this is a standalone novel, or this is a standalone novel with series potential, or this is part of a 3-book series I have planned. You have to specify I have planned because of the fact that it's a lot harder to get guaranteed for series. If you say standalone with series potential, you're actually more likely to get people on board with your novel than if you just say 7-book series straight away, because that's the equivalent of someone saying, marry me right now, and you're like, that's a lot of commitment, or saying, hey, maybe we could get married one day. That's a lot more like, oh, okay, that could be fun one day. Like, it's kind of, think of it like dating. Query letter is very much like dating in the regard that you don't want to scare them off. So generally I would say if you can make it a standalone with series potential, do that, because you're much more likely to have less problems with publishers and with agents. They're much less likely to run away in fear if you say that it has series potential rather than just saying it's part of a series. However, if it is part of a series and it's a smaller series, you still might be able to get away with that. Like I said, 3 books or a duology, or even I might say 4 books, but anything beyond 4 and you're probably going to scare them off. It's too much commitment for them. They're not ready for that. They barely know you and your manuscript. Next thing is to make sure that the first chapter is really a great hook and showcases your writing in its best light. When I say in your best light, make sure it is as polished and edited as you can possibly get it. Now, I know this is controversial. There are some people who use things stylistically, grammatically, that aren't technically correct. The only thing that I would say here is don't break the grammar rule unless you know all the grammar rules. If you know the grammar rule and you're choosing to break it for stylistic purposes, then go ahead and give it a try. But most of the time, if you don't know the rule and you're just breaking a grammar rule on accident, that's actually going to look less professional and going to put them on a little bit of thin ice. However, if they can tell you're doing it intentionally, that's going to make it a lot easier for them to get on board with you. Also, make sure that your character is active and not passive. So basically, to explain what this means, make sure that your character isn't just watching things happen to them and letting things happen to them and making choices because they feel they have to. Make them an active character. They have their own choices. They have their own life. They want to do their own thing. They have their own goals. Maybe they don't even want to be a part of this darn prophecy. Make sure that they are actively changing the universe around them and being proactive. They're not just watching things happen. They're not just letting things happen. They're the ones who are pushing for change actively. Even if it's not a huge thing, they're still actively trying to move towards change. Make sure, the next thing that I need to mention is make sure that your synopsis isn't more than 500 words. Now, some people say, 1,000 words is acceptable only for certain publishing companies and agents. Most agents say less than 500 words is preferred. Some agents even say 800 or 1,000 words, but very, very rarely. It's better to be prepared with a 500-word synopsis and be offered a longer, and be like, hey, you can do a 1,000-word one, than have a 1,000-word one and then have to cut it down. Better to have the 500 and expand on it than to have the 1,000-word and have to cut it up. It's a lot harder to cut out than it is to add to. Sorry, just waving goodbye to the person who was in here. I would also highly recommend, if you're going to do an effective synopsis for your submissions, to use the 7-point plot structure. Now, just Google 7-point plot structure by Dan Wells. Funnily enough, he didn't create the 7-point plot structure. He borrowed it from somewhere, but everyone thinks it's by him. So if you Google it that way, that's the way it pops up. Now, he would probably laugh knowing that. But use the 7-point plot structure because it maps it out perfectly. And if you do it exactly as that says and just write about 1 sentence for each 7-point in the plot structure, you'll find that you'll hit less than or exactly 500 words. And that will be perfect for a synopsis. I have never had this method fail me thus far. Sure, there's times where you need to edit it or polish it a little bit, but plot-wise, it nails it pretty perfectly if you do a sentence for each of the 7 points in the 7-point plot structure. The last thing that I'm going to say is don't give up. most of all, if you are planning to traditionally publish, you are embarking on a journey of lots and lots of rejections. Very few people get a book deal solidly within the first couple times. I can name dozens and dozens of names, but pretty much anyone who is a famous author gets rejected dozens of times. I would even say, like, there are some that say that they put a nail on their wall. Stephen King did this, put a nail on his wall and just putting letters on there, and he ran out of space, and it was like a huge nail. That's a lot of rejection letters. And there was a Jennifer Nielsen, I believe it was, actually, where she actually brought to a writing conference that I went to her binder full of rejection letters, and it's like a thick binder. And yet she's a New York Times best-selling author now, and she has dozens of book deals. Author is her career path now. That's all she does. And yet she got so many rejection letters. It was ridiculous. And then you even have moments where people reject you and they don't realize what they rejected. I know that Jessica Day George mentioned that she had dozens of rejection letters that she got, and more than dozens, but I'm just underestimating because I don't remember the exact number. And she said that she went to a writing conference and they said, "Oh, why did you never submit to us?" And she said, "I did submit to you. I have your rejection letter in my stack." And they were kind of mortified. They were like, "Wow, we rejected your book. It was so great, though." And that's because a lot of times the editor is biased. A lot of times someone doesn't really know the rest of the story, so they judge based on the first chapter and assume the rest is not any good. There are other times where also people judge based on, like I said, not being polished enough, so maybe it wasn't as polished before and they didn't see the potential in it. Maybe they decided that out of all the manuscripts they had that day, hers would be the most work, and like I said, they don't want to do as much work. Who knows what the story is behind that? But the point is that even famous authors who are New York Times bestsellers, and that dozens of people come to their, dozens and hundreds of people come to their book signings, started with almost nothing. They started with rejection after rejection after rejection. So these are tips and tricks to help you, but don't be discouraged if you get rejected a lot. And if you do, please feel free to come and talk to me, to come and get more help, to come and just even vent about how frustrated you are. I am always more than happy to help. Rejection is hard to deal with, especially in the traditional publishing world. I hope that these tips help and that they can help you get a little bit more of your foot in the door, even if they don't guarantee that you will get accepted, because unfortunately even doing everything right, you don't always get accepted. But I would say just keep trying. Please don't ever give up. If your dream is to get traditionally published and that's going to work better for you, then do it. If you find that traditionally publishing isn't going to work for you for whatever reason, independently publishing is still amazing. But if you don't want to go that route and you don't feel that route is for you, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with continuing to try even in the face of rejection. Please don't give up, even if taking all these tips and tricks makes it so it doesn't guarantee your success. I hope that it'll at least help improve your chances, because everyone deserves to have their story told. I hope you have a lovely day. Thanks.